on record, I guess, unless there's anything people feel we need to discuss before we do. Silence reigns, so we'll run the record. We're here this afternoon in docket 7628, which is the joint petition of Green Mountain Power Corporation, Vermont Electric Cooperative, Inc., and Vermont Electric Power Company, Inc., for a certificate of public good pursuant to 30 DSA Section 248 to construct up to a 63 megawatt wind electric generation facility and associated facilities on Lowell Mountain in Lowell, Vermont, and the installation or upgrade of approximately 16.9 miles of transmission line and associated substations in Lowell, Westfield, VA, Vermont. My name is John Cotter. I'm a staff attorney and hearing officer at the board, and with me today is Tom Nauer. He's also a hearing officer at the board. We were staff on the merits portion of this case when it was heard by the board, and so the board assigned us to come down and conduct a workshop today, and the purpose of today's workshop is to discuss and hear some suggestions on how the sound monitoring reports that Green Mountain Power has been filing at the end of seasonal sound monitoring periods might be improved to be a little bit more readable, a little bit more understandable and user-friendly to the average reader. So why don't we go ahead and go around the room and take notices of appearance? Jeff? Thank you.
Jeffrey Commons for the Department of Public Service. With me are Aaron Kasicki, Special Counsel, and Alan St. Peter, Electrical Engineer.
Excuse me. I'm Stephen Ambrose. I'm an independent consultant in acoustics, and I'm from Windham, Maine, and I'm an interested consultant trying to provide assistance to understanding how to do a proper acoustic measurement.
Okay, well, we're not actually discussing how they're doing the sound monitoring.
I know, but that also involves the presentation of data.
Yeah, okay. Now, I should say that when the board issued its order establishing this workshop, obviously it's an open proceeding, it's a public proceeding, but the board did limit active participation today to parties from the original proceeding that intervened and had standing on the topic of noise. That said, if there are people here that can make creative suggestions in how to improve the content of the report, and none of the parties have an objection to that, then I think that's something Mr. Nauer and I would be comfortable with, and I think if it leads to a better product in the end, that'd be something that everybody would appreciate. But as I mentioned, we're talking about presentation of information, not about how the monitoring is done or what the standard was that the board established.
Understood.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm Robin Clark, representing the Lowell Mountain Group, and Steve Ambrose has come to assist me.
Okay.
Kevin McGrath, I'm fine.
Mr. McGrath.
Michelle Devere, I'm here to assist this gentleman.
Okay.
Peter Zamor for Green Mountain Power, and with me today are Josh Castigay and Eddie Duncan.
So Mr. Nauer and I were sort of discussing how to do this, and we were thinking that maybe we just go through the proposed sample page by page, section by section. If people have comments or questions, we could do it that way. If somebody else has a better idea, we're certainly open to hear it. The workshop was actually proposed by GMP, so Mr. Zamor, I didn't know if you had any thoughts in this regard.
If it would help, Eddie is prepared to go through the sample report and explain what has changed and why, if that would be helpful.
Any of the other folks have any comments on that, on how to proceed?
I guess my question would be, does that contemplate people asking questions during the presentation? I think there are other folks who will probably have comments that they want to make, and I don't know how much sort of dialogue you envision there.
That's fine, absolutely fine.
Yeah, I would rather not go through the whole report twice. I would think, yes, as we discuss each section, and then he could go ahead and talk about the changes that were made and the intent behind the changes, and then we can go around the room and see what kind of comments, questions, and suggestions people have with respect to each section. That sound good to everybody? Okay.
I've got a couple extra copies if anyone wants copies since we're going to be discussing it. Anybody wants to go ahead?
All right, my name is Eddie Duncan, and I'm a consultant to Green Mountain Power from RSG. We made a number of changes, as you may have noticed in reviewing the shell that we sent out prior to this meeting. And those changes were based on some feedback that we received from the Nelsons and from other parties about the reports, and specifically the understandability of the reports. So what we tried to do is address some of the feedback and comments that were made, but in general, we've tried to increase the understandability of the reports, the transparency within the reports, the accessibility of the reports, the technical accuracy, and the readability. The primary focus being understandability, but we tried to keep those other things in mind as well as we made some of these changes. So the general themes of what we've changed in the report, and then we can go into it, are that we've added an executive summary that takes you through all of the key portions within the report, and so some readers may choose to stop there, or some readers may choose to dive into it further. We added or removed information from the main body of the report into the appendices. A lot of this information is information that was repeated from one compliance report to another, and so rather than have it in the main body and have to go through that if you're reading a report, that's now contained in an appendix. We also provided illustrative graphs, examples of graphs that help orient the reader to the data that they're looking at in that graph, so that they can better understand it. And we've also provided introductions to each section, so you know exactly what's in that section before you read it. You may choose to continue to read it, or you may skip past that section. And then in addition, we've provided expanded explanations on some key points surrounding data processing. So that's the primary components that we've added to this report. So with that, I'll go into the report, and so nothing's changed on the cover other than a picture, essentially. And then we haven't really changed the format of the contents or the list of figures or tables. You'll see that it's a shorter list of figures and tables because many of those figures or tables have been moved to appendices. And the list of figures and tables here are only to show what's in the main body of the report. You'll also notice in the contents that there's more appendices that have been in this report than have been in previous reports. I think in the past we've had about 4 appendices, and now we have 8 appendices. So then moving on to page 1, it's the executive summary. Within the executive summary, we have information as to when the monitoring was conducted, very briefly the sites that we monitored at and the data that was collected, a description of data that was omitted from the compliance analysis, and then we have a description of what the overall results are, including the highest sound levels at each monitoring location.
Mr. Duncan, can I jump in here?
Sure.
One thing as I was reviewing this, if I am a new board member, if I am a legislator, if I am someone new to the process, I don't know why I'm reading this report. So one suggestion that to consider is maybe not a citation to all of the applicable CPG conditions, but a statement that the board set this sound standard, something along those lines. Just, most of the people in this room are intimately familiar with the last 3 or 4 years of what's been going on in this case, but people outside this room who may pick up a copy of this could use that introduction.
That's great. Excuse me, I do have a chest cold, so I may cough periodically here. Is that something that you would envision or like to see in an executive summary or in the introduction or both?
Do you know?
I mean, these are, I guess if you have a hard feeling about that, I'd like to know what it is. If it's kind of either, that's fine.
In my opinion, it would be helpful in the executive summary.
I think it would just be sort of like the first thing somebody read would be a little, like, context for them.
Why do they need?
Yeah, and it doesn't, as Mr. Nauer said, it doesn't need to be incredibly detailed quoting the CPG or anything, just probably 1 or 2 sentences would be sufficient to orient folks.
Any other comments or feedback on the executive summary before I move on? Mr. St. Peter?
Yeah, on the, I think it's the 4th paragraph, you talk about the temperature issues with the monitoring equipment. That seemed to me not really pertinent in the executive summary, other than to mention that there were times when data would be removed from the monitored data. That seemed to be more into the methodologies section. It just seemed like it was in the wrong section here.
Sure.
And then immediately above that, you talked about things being omitted. To me, in an executive summary, it might be interesting just a percentage of each of the omissions. A percentage of rain noise, or a percentage of unidentified, or something that was deleted from the data. If I read it for the first time, that would be interesting to see it right up front.
I appreciate that. The comment on the low temperatures, that we put in the executive summary, at least from, I don't know that I would see it in there in every monitoring period, but it has been a comment of consistent issue from report to report, and so we just wanted to put that up front so that it's right there. But
Yeah.
I understand.
Understand, but I know there's other details of other reasons for other things. Seem to me they should all be kind of grouped together of why they were deletions.
I don't think a reference to it is inappropriate, but
No,
it's maybe
no.
more detailed than necessary in that 4th paragraph.
Exactly.
Great.
Unless there's anything else, moving on to the introduction, page 2, section 2. We've also tried to keep it fairly tidy, so the executive summary is a nice 1 page, the intro is a nice 1 page, but that can fluctuate a little bit. So in the introduction, again, we state when the monitoring period was, and then we describe the sections within the report. So this is kind of a reproduction of the table of contents, really, except that it gives you a little more of a description of what's in each section. So we say what's in the main body of the report, and then we provide an expanded description of what's contained within the each appendices. And then lastly, what we used to have in this section, a specific reference to all the compliance monitoring reports, and instead of having them listed here, we have a reference to them in the appendix, and we just simply state that this is the X report that is being issued, and that the other ones are referred to in the back.
Any comments, suggestions, questions on the introduction? Move along.
All right. So then the third section is methodology. One difference that I would point out, if you're looking at 2 pages here, page 2 and 3, the reports used to go from introduction to some other sections. Now we go from introduction to methodology. Those other sections have been moved to appendices, which include a primer on sound terminology, which is now in Appendix A, a project description. This is more of a not pre-construction, but since it's constructed, a description of what Kingdom Community Wind is. That's in Appendix B. And then Appendix C is some of the information that used to be contained within the methodology section. What we've done is we've trimmed down the methodology section to make it more readable, but still give that additional detail in Appendix C if someone wants to dive into more detail within the methodology. So Section 3, we give a brief description in Section 3.1. Well, I should first point out at each of these sections, so Section 3 and Section 4 in particular, have a description at the very beginning now that tell you what's contained within Section 3. So here we tell you what's to come. And then in Section 3.1, we give a very general description of background sound monitoring. That is Method 1 and Method 2, and how we account for background sound levels. And then also where those methods are used or what sites those methods are used for. And
Mr. Doctor,
Sure.
I think you meant method 2 and 3, right?
Did I say 4?
No, you said 1 and 2.
Sorry, 2 and 3, sorry. 2 and 3.
Just we have a court reporter here today, so
That would be-
we better be accurate.
Yeah, thank you, sorry about that. And then maybe I'll cover section 3.2 and then we can make comments, if there are any. Section 3.2 goes over, again, when the monitoring was conducted, but then dives more into the timing of the monitoring. So we talk about how we had checkups and on the monitors during the monitoring period, and then we provide the total runtime for the equipment that was at each site, and that is provided in Table 1 in both days and hours, and then the type of equipment that was used.
Is this, all of this hypothetical, or is this an actual report?
This is a shell of a report. Some of the, any of the tables or graphs that you see within the report, within this shell, are from previous monitoring reports.
Thank you.
Sure.
May I ask a question?
Oh, yes.
In your description of the data processing, particularly the background sound for method 3, in the spring 2013 report, there was a footnote in that report. It was section 5.3.1, background method 3 analysis, process description. And the footnote, and I'm wondering, I don't see it in here, and I'm wondering if this issue still applies to your monitoring process. It says, as previously discussed, both method 3 and 2 were utilized for this study to account for the background sound levels. As discussed in the fall 2012 study, we were able to evaluate method 3 to determine if the buildings adequately attenuated wind turbine noise across all frequencies. Upon reviewing the data, we determined that method 3 is not an adequate method for determining the background sound levels. Please see the fall 2012 report for an explanation of this opinion. I'm wondering about the fundamental issue of being able to graph something that you have stated that you can't adequately measure. I'm a little confused about how you put something on paper that you have stated you can't measure adequately.
Right, so we provide the results for method 3 because that's one of the methods that's used to analyze background sound levels. And as you point out in the spring report and in the fall report in further detail, we've previously stated what we have found data 3, the sufficiency of data 3. So those are both out there on paper. They're not conflicting, they're both, it's a data set and we've previously qualified that data set.
Is there some way that so that it can be represented in the graphing and the presentation of the report? Is there some way that in the graphing it can be visualized, explained, that when you reach certain levels of, because the explanation that you actually give in the report is when the wind reaches, I believe it was 5 meters per second, that the impact on the microphone starts disturbing the ability to read the turbine-only sound. If you have a fundamental mechanical impedance to being able to actually read the backgrounds, the turbine sound, is there another process that you have available to you that is more accurate, that would permit it to be done? I'm confused about the ability to measure something you say you can't measure.
I'm not sure he said he couldn't measure.
Well, it says it's inadequate.
Yeah, that's different.
Okay, so can you qualify the accuracy of the information that we're getting, maybe with a percentage of accuracy. The data in this graph represents a possible 60% accuracy, 80% accuracy, 100% accuracy, some way that we can, and the board could evaluate exactly how good the information that you're providing is.
Yeah, so the reference in the spring report and the fall report are a opinion about method 3. So that, I mean, that's what that is. It's an opinion. It's not a quantified opinion. Other than we do provide information in the fall report as to supporting information as to why we have that opinion in the fall 2012 report, I believe. So it may be useful to either read that, or maybe it's useful to provide that reasoning within an appendix of this report for readers who are interested in why that opinion has been stated.
Well, I think maybe I'm not getting my point across, is that you have stated, and I'm sure everybody in this room has read that statement, that upon reviewing the data, we determined that method 3 is not an adequate method for determining background sound levels. Is there some way that the graphs themselves, the representation, visual representation for analysis by both the department and the board and the public could view that data and have a quantifying element to it? That I'm a little perplexed how you can present results from a method that you say you can't adequately determine.
Just to jump in, the method is required under the protocol. We have a specific sequence of methods to use. And there was one method, I forget which one it was, initially we used, and that was not adequate enough. And then the next two that we were required to use were 2 and 3. So that's part of it. We can certainly cross-reference in this report the statement in the prior report, and if there is something in addition that is helpful to describe in terms of that conclusion, we can certainly do that.
Is there a margin of error that could be stated then, if the measuring method isn't, as you state, is not adequate? Can you represent a margin of error in method 3 analysis?
We haven't undertaken a type of analysis to define a margin of error. It is a general statement on that method, things that we've noticed with that method that could be flawed. That's what was stated in the fall report and reiterated in the spring report. But we have not undertaken a study or an analysis to determine to what extent method 3 is accurate.
I think, just to jump in, I mean, with the graphs, at least this is my understanding from reading this over the months and years, is that the graphs are reporting the actual measurements that were taken. I take your point that method 3 is by the folks doing the work, by their own statement, is not as they don't. It's a little bit inadequate.
If I may chime in on this, it's a defective measurement technique. You cannot exclude outdoor sounds produced by a wind turbine or a power plant or some other large source from being measured by putting it behind a physical barrier. The wavelengths are such that it will get around the building and still reach the microphone. So their conclusion that this isn't working, it's very valid. And method 3 doesn't work, and they've proved it to themselves. Yes, we can do it numerically, but I can then end up also saying, by experience, that method doesn't work.
Okay, well, I mean, now we're kind of drifting.
I know, I just trying to, but we
Yeah.
got into a discussion, I'm saying, they acknowledge that it doesn't work, and I'm basically saying, yes, that's a
Yeah.
valid decision.
And that's why we have two methodologies in there,
Yeah.
and they're required to do both. So,
Sir, could I address your specific question about the graphing on this?
sure.
In looking at the graphs themselves, when they're, and these are the ones that are measuring the method 3, if you take the various graphs that were presented, there are a couple of issues that we, as the public, and probably you, have that impede you in being able to interpret, and that is the fact that they're so small. There are no lines, unless you put them in yourselves, that show the exceedance level for decibels or the 5 meters per second line that would be an exceedance that would trigger the information being rejected. When I was able to blow up the graphs, and you can see in a much larger scale the time frames, there appear to be several instances when exclusions occurred when none of the criteria that would have triggered any rejection of that information were in there. And I'm wondering if there's a way for, instead of the graphs to be shown as a 2.5 by 2 block, they could be a full page that makes the information on there meaningfully usable to everyone.
Mr. Zamor?
I'm not sure there's any reason why we can't, and that sounds like a helpful change to make.
I have one other suggestion, is that the way they're presented with the graphs that have 3 different very important components for the analysis are all widely separated. And as you look at them, you can't see a contiguous comparison if you go from one to the other in time frame, dates, and the hours that the operation can be measured. If those graphs could be done in sequence on a page, even if it ends up being a legal sheet that's pulled out in the book itself, so that you can go down and you can see, okay, here the turbines were running, this is when you were getting the turbine only. You can go up to the next graph and look at it and see that you have the various legs that are being measured, and then the more comprehensive history result graph, so that the elements of it are all in a line, so that you can actually look up the page and see what was happening when in the information from one graph to the next graph to the other, just to make the analysis easier.
Okay, I'm not sure that I understand that feedback. I appreciate it, but the figures for method 3 analysis have always been listed in a row, and they do overlap from page to page.
Yes, I'm talking about maybe something like this, that lets you then look at all of the 3 elements for any one location, and the time of day and the date segments match as you go up the page,
Sure.
so that you can look up and see what's occurring in one 6-hour period with all 3 elements of crafting that you're doing.
Can you continue to hold that up for a second?
Sure.
Just so for reference, the graph. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Michelle.
The graph that Michelle is holding up is actually a combination of 3 different graphs within the report.
If you'd like, I can give you this too.
Oh, that would be great, thank you. The one graph so she's saying, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that she would like 3 different types of graphs that are provided in the report, aligned by date. Specifically, the graphs that are in the illustration she's provided include the project activity graphs, which are contained in section 4.1, the method 3 graphs, which are contained in section, did I say 3.1 before?
Yes.
Excuse me, 4.1.
What page are you on?
Page 12, section 4, in the results.
So just to clarify, this is in the proposed, you're referring to?
I'm referring to the proposed report, not a previous report. So section 4 of the proposed report, the graphs that are in the illustrations that Michelle provided include the project activity graphs. In the proposed report, it's figure 10. The other graph that is in this is contained within section 4.3, 4.4, and 4. All of the monitoring sites results. It's the method 3 results, which are shown in figure 14 of the proposed report. And the last graph that is contained in the provided illustration is actually a time history graph, which is in an appendix in the report, in Appendix E in the proposed report modifications. I'll just pull it up again so everyone can see. Those are the 3 graphs that are suggested that they're time aligned.
If you would indulge me, I have one more suggestion for method 2.
Sure, go for it.
In measuring method 2, a very important component of method 2 is to be able to correlate when the turbines have been shut down in the time sequence that is recommended for being able to get the turbine only, the background only, and then the 1 hour before and after. The way it's presented now, it's almost impossible to be able to see if there is no real grafting for method 2. It's just it's a document. It would be helpful to be able to see in graphs, linear graphs like this, that are matched up with what would be the project activity. It would be repeating the project activity graph here. It shows when turbines are running, how many there are, what their output is, so that you can actually see that at the proper times that there was curtailment during the day, and that would match up with a grafting of the background and primary, and then the turbine only results, just the way you do for method 3. Right now, just looking at it as just this PDF is pretty difficult.
So method 2 are discrete results. They're a single number when we're talking about the hour before, during, and after. And so one way that may be doable would be to plot the average power output that is provided, so where you can see those curtailments occur.
Okay.
And then in that graph have discrete points at each of those times that say hour before, hour after,
And their values.
and then
And you show
the
them.
turbine only as well. So there would be a total of 6 dots stacked on top of each other for each of those shutdown periods. Is that kind of what you're
That
envisioning?
would seem to be even much more helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. St. Pierre.
Just as a very brief comment, I would concur 100% of what you've just said, because quite frankly, I do the same thing. I pull them up, cut and paste them, get them to line up.
Thank you. Have an Apple computer?
Nope. It's okay.
You go the hard route.
I go the hard way. But yes, I would be very much appreciated having represented that way. When you're trying to compare all these factors, you really can't.
it's, just remember, your ear is processing that in real time, breaking all those charts right out, putting, you know, our ear is a very good signal analyzer.
Thank you, Michelle. I think some of those things you'll see are in reference to things that we're about to cover as well. But so if there's any further clarification. So on to, we covered section 3.1 and 3.2.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? As far as 3.2, and it also was in 3.3, those tables 1 and 2 that you show here, to me, those are more data than really are methodologies. And I would recommend that they be moved to a data section as opposed to a methodology.
I don't have a strong feeling one way or another, but does anyone else have any comments on that feedback? Just want to see if it's shared or if there's any.
It's data.
Okay. Section 3.3. The beginning portion of section 3.3 is very similar to what's been provided in previous reports. The paragraphs that follow the bullet points are expanded to explain how we know that omitted reasons for omission is occurring, and also so how we know and why those reasons are omitted. The overarching thing is that those reasons are dictated in the monitoring protocol, but we provide a little more information about why high winds are omitted, why low temperature, times of low temperature is omitted, and then rain and anomalous sound sources as well. And then I would also point out for rain and anomalous sources, we've also provided additional detail in Appendix C as to how we can tell there are anomalous sources occurring and how we can tell there is rain occurring. Besides the sensors, we can tell from the acoustical data as well that these other events are occurring. And so we provide an explanation of what a spectrogram is. These are tools that we use in looking at sound level. That's contained in Appendix C. It's a new part of the report. It might be more detailed than most readers want to dive into, but if anyone's interested in seeing, you know, what an acoustical fingerprint of a wind turbine looks like, or an acoustical fingerprint of high winds looks like, they can look at those spectrograms in Appendix C now.
Mr. Duncan, I had a question. If memory serves, I asked this question at the show cause hearing that we had last fall. The first sentence under section 3.3 reads, data was summarized into 10-minute periods. And I don't know what it means to summarize data. So if it's obvious to everyone else that's in the room, then we'll leave it alone. But if you can clarify what that means, I think that would be instructive to the reader.
That'd be great.
It's a misuse of the word summarized. The event is a 10-minute sample period. And everything is presented in 10-minute intervals. And so you end up getting an average level, the L EQ, you get the L max in that 10-minute sample, the L minimum, all that. But it's just, everything's divided into 10-minute intervals. So that's how the word summarize is being done. And if you end up sampling once a second, you get 60 in a minute, 3,600 in an hour.
Are there other questions or feedback on section 3.3?
Yeah, I was on 3.3.1, just wanted you to confirm the illustration of a moving average, those values in there mean nothing other than they're just there to show how it works, right?
Yeah, this is completely an illustration
Yeah.
of how a moving average is. So part of this is based off of, and this has actually been in some previous reports, not all of them, but there was a question at one point as to how we could have multiple 1 hour LEQs occurring within an 1.5 hour time frame.
Right.
And so we were trying to explain how that works.
Yeah, I found that chart to be very helpful in that regard. Do you know when, not to rub salt into a wound, but early in the project operations, there were some exceedances reported. Do you know if they were reported in this manner? In other words, that you know, you have these different, and I get that the level would change over time. I seem to remember one of the reports said that the 45 dBA LEQ 1 hour was exceeded for, and it was a time period of like 1 hour and 20 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So is that is basically an example of this? So just kind of, you took the first hour and it moved over a couple of 10-minute increments?
That's exactly right.
Okay, great, thanks.
I did skip the subsections under section 3.3. So one thing we include in section 3.3.1 is a reference to the equation that is used. It's we just basically describe it so that it's simple for the reader to understand that data from the primary background monitor is subtracted from the primary monitor without going into detail of how that is subtracted. But we do provide a reference to the equation in the footnote for those who want to go into that deeper.
This is where funny math comes to bear. You're sampling once a second, but we're only reporting 36, the summation of 3,600 of these. In order to get the primary minus the background, you need to do that subtraction for each interval that's measured, for each second, in order, and not the average, because you lose the true fluctuation, and so it all just gets smeared as to be two lines. But you really need to have the dynamics between each 1 second measurement. Very complex, but I mean, that's, in order to make that work, that's what truly has to be done, because you need to compare the background with and this is where you need the microphones to be equal distance from the turbine. I disagree with the shielded microphone, but you have to have the sound arrive at each microphone at the same instant in time to do that math properly, and it's got to be done every second. That's your sample period.
I think that, again, unfortunately we're drifting into...
I agree, but I'm saying if you find that this is not working, that is the reason. You can't take the average of the wind turbine sound level and the average of the shielded measurements and do a subtraction that makes any sense.
Okay, so, you know, this protocol was what was...
I know, but it was not working. That could be why.
If I could, if you indulge me.
Sure.
And this is on section 3.4, the individual monitoring steps.
I'm not there yet.
Well, the background method, totality methodology.
Oh, the tonality method, yeah.
Excuse me, could we just let him go section by section, because other people may have questions
I'm sorry,
on
I
sections
thought he was
before
on.
where you are, and I understand, you know, if you want to go ahead to where your questions are, but it wouldn't make sense for us to start bouncing back and forth like that. So I appreciate that, and when we get to your section, I promise to get to more, okay?
So that was section 3.3.1. Any other comments on that?
I had a question, the word process. Whether it's appropriate in this section to say was movement processed, or if the section 3.3 talking about when data was excluded, if that is what is meant by processed.
anything else on this subsection? Section 3.3.2.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
It's talking about the shutdown periods.
Yes.
It says, it is for this reason that investigating periods for method 2 were those when the existence of a shutdown period could be determined by visually scanning the spectrograms. Why would you need to scan the spectrograms? I mean, don't you just know that there was a shutdown period because the operator shut it down?
Yes, so the SCADA data that comes from the project is in 10-minute intervals, and so we can see within a 10-minute interval when the project is shut down. We're monitoring 1 second data, and so the project may not actually shut down right at midnight or 4 a.m. It might be 4:02.
Light bulb just went on, I got it.
Sure.
Good pun. I said good pun.
Excuse me, so method 2, section 3.3.2, as in previous reports, we state what the schedule is for shutdowns, and then we talk about how we identified when there were shutdowns, and then, yeah, so it's just describing how method 2 briefly is done. There's more detail in appendix C.
I think some grammatical issues with that second paragraph under 3.3.2. Shutdown periods do not necessarily mean exactly at the schedule. Reads kind of rough.
Yeah, that's a mistake, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually, as I read through the report, stumbled across a number of typos, so I'm assuming that there's going to be an edit done to it before it gets finalized.
Yeah, there is. This is a draft shell,
Yeah.
so this is like pre-draft, really. So there might be some, when we've edited text, there might be some things like that.
Mr. Nauer and I decided not to take up time by saying, oh, we found a
Thank
typo.
you. So that's section 3.3.2 for the brief description of method 2. Section 3.3.3 is the tonality analysis methodology. This is unchanged from previous reports. I believe it's unchanged. There may be a few words here and there. But it essentially talks about ENC 12.9.4.
I have a question on your tonality. Do you do it on the 10-minute average data?
The tonality is completed on the method 2 data, so it's actually the hour before, the hour after a turbine shutdown.
But you're dealing with that average data.
That's correct.
So you're considering that the tone is constant versus fluctuating. Because tones from turbines fluctuate. So again, when you average over a long duration, you collapse the tone. And so it's a very hard measurement to do unless you have a constant tone as from a transformer. But the turbines, my experience with them is that they're always fluctuating because it's a dynamic machine in motion, and there's nothing steady state about it.
Do specific feedback about making the methodology clear for section 3.3?
Well, if the methodology isn't able to identify a tone, the methodology may be flawed because it's dealing with average data versus simultaneous. Very rapid. You have to have a short segment of data to capture a tone from a wind turbine.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm asking if there's any changes that you would envision to the description of it.
It's, no.
Okay.
I do.
Sure.
In this, to my average mediocre mind, is incredibly confusing. Tonality seems as though it would have an equal weight, whether you're using method 1 or method 3 or method 2. Is that correct? Or is
I'm not
it-
sure what you mean by an equal weight.
Well, tonality analysis methodology seems to be only applied when you are doing the measurements for method 2.
That's correct.
Correct. First, I'm not quite sure why tonality would not apply to both methods, but the question, my suggestion for improving the clarity of this is that this is obviously, the tonality is something that you're measuring and could be graphed. Right now, we have no way of seeing how the tonality readings relate to the results with method 2. So if you're going to be doing a graph for method 2 that shows the turbine function and your points for the measurement in method 2, shouldn't that include in there a graphing of the tonality? So that, because that is, it seems to be an important analytical element of method 2.
Sure. We do provide graphs for the tonality analysis on page 15, section 4.4.3. The amount of graphs that could be produced for the tonality analysis would be quite extensive. We provide the worst case tonality analysis result in graphic form.
I haven't seen it in graphic form. You do it as a chart. You do it as a list, not...
No. The tonality is in a graph form. If you can turn to page 15, the vertical axis is the extent of tonality, and the horizontal axis is the 1/3 octave band frequency at which those tones could occur. And so it shows whether or not there's tonality per the ANSI tonality definition.
Yes, this comes to the crux of my question. Since this is such an important element in the analysis of method 2, can this be incorporated with the rest of the analysis, or my suggested graphing of method 2 as opposed to listing it, so that you can actually see how the tonality is a function of the levels that you're reading? So that we can see?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know how to fit all of that onto one graph. I'm open to. I'm not trying to.
Make it a big.
I'm open to feedback about it. We're not talking about. So in method 2, we're talking about single numbers of hour before, hour after. Those are overall levels, which is the summation of all those frequencies. When we start to talk about tonality, we talk about levels at all of those 1/3 octave bands, and so it's quite a bit of data to represent for each shutdown period, especially with the recommended method 2 versus time graphs. I'm open to suggestions if someone has a good way of representing that, but in my mind right now, I have to be honest that I can't envision that.
Just another quick comment, and it really doesn't address this issue, but it's on tonality. As opposed to presenting it in the graphical form that you have, I've seen this often presented as a tabular form, which I think is easier to understand for the layperson. So then you can look at the subtractions, if you will, between the adjacent 1/3 octave bands and actually see. And it spells out basically what you've got on the graph, but it isn't a tabular chart form, which I think is easier to understand. When I first saw this, I had to go look it up to see what it stood for. I've always seen it before done in a tabular format.
Would you like to see it in, are you proposing to see it for the worst case scenario in tabular format in the report, or?
Right, yeah, that's all I would be looking for is worst case tabular.
That's interesting. I've always found the tabular a little more like tedious to look through, whereas this kind of, jumps out if the bar is above the line or not.
But if you throw it onto an Excel spreadsheet, you can color highlight it and show it pretty easily.
Either way, this is a simple, straightforward method to do it. But again, it's a 10-minute average in there.
I understand.
And what I get concerned, so this is, whether this is a numerical averaging of the numbers or an equivalent, a log average of the number, you are so close to hitting the trip mark of 8 dB that raises a red flag for me right off the bat, because I know this tone fluctuates and I'm only looking at the average. And what is the true extent of that tone? Is it plus 3 dB? That would be a conservative estimate. Worst case, could be off by 4 or 5. But yeah, there's a tone there to be concerned with.
Just back to your question, Al. Should we, because you mentioned using Excel or something to look at it, should we keep the graph in the body and maybe do what you're looking for in an appendix?
That would work.
That way, because I think
The graph certainly is a more compact way to express it, but I think
we could put the raw data
in a tabular,
This is eye-friendly.
I'm an engineer. So.
I know, I see that. You like to gnaw on the data.
Yeah.
Any other comments on 3.3.3? 3.4 is the description of the individual monitoring sites. This is similar to previous reports. We haven't really changed anything in this section. I will note, some readers may or may not have noticed that from report to report, the photographs actually do change. The photographs are representative of that monitoring period. And so to try and make that a little clearer, one thing we did change in this section is we dated the photographs. And so we'll try and date the photographs going forward so people can see what the monitors look like, at least on a specific date. There is some question, and I would appreciate feedback on this, as to whether or not people would like to continue to see this in the main body of the report, or if you would like to see it, it's generally the same going forward. That in this case, in the upcoming report, section 3.4.1, you'll notice that there is no monitor site A. But besides that, it's generally the same. So I'd be interested in feedback as to whether or not we should include the main body or move it to an appendix.
I guess I don't feel strongly either way. I don't know how other people, I guess it comes down to that, if somebody's reading the report for the first time, it would probably be okay to have it in the report, but if it's people that have read it for half a dozen times, then I think they would know to flip to the appendix and be familiar with it. They'd only need to do it if they had specific questions. Yes?
Yeah. I have done, in my previous life with Stone & Webster Engineering, work with FERC and also with the Power Authority of New York. When we ended up having multiple sites, multiple dates, all this, quite often we would produce the report, the generic report that covered everything, and then we'd have dated appendices that would come in. This is what's happened in the last 6 months, and it's the data and any comments that would be relevant to something be different than previous. But yes, these reports, they all read very much the same, and you have to dig into them and pull the data out. It may be best to have the addendums put in as an appendix for each 3-month, 6-month, or annual report, and then you don't have to wade through the report again.
So if I understand what you're saying, take all the generic stuff, make that the report, and then make the data from each sound monitoring period be an addendum?
Yeah, and that just, it saves paperwork, and if you do need to go in, you just go back to the generic report that's up front, and if you do a modification, then you end up replacing the page. When you end up dealing with nuclear projects that last for 10, 12 years, that was the easy way to do it.
Yeah, I know, well, right now, I think there's 3 more monitoring periods.
3 more reports, 2 more monitoring report periods to be conducted.
Oh,
No.
right, because you finished the
Winter,
winter
2014.
recently, yeah, and then so spring starts soon. So I don't know that there would be a lot to be saved from that. I appreciate the suggestion, but yeah,
In your future life.
there you go.
Barring any other feedback on section 3.4, we move on to section 4.0. This is the results section of the report. I'll point out at the beginning of section 4, there's a brief description of the information to come in section 4, and then we move on to section 4.1, which is the turbine operations graphics. The data contained within the turbine operation graphics, there's actually 2 data sets. One is operating turbines, or the number of operating turbines, and the second is the total project power output. Because we have 2 data sets on the same graph, we have 2 vertical axes on this graph, and it may be difficult for some readers to read. We've tried to address that a little bit by color coding the vertical axes with the data that's presented within the graph. So you'll see there's a brown vertical axis on the left side of the graph that corresponds with the number of operating turbines. It's the same color as those dots, and then the vertical axis on the right is green, which is the same color as the total project output. We've also planned to provide this graph or something like this graph strictly for illustrative purposes using data from a previous monitoring period. So the purpose is not that this data belongs with this report, but it's a way of explaining how to read the graph before you see the rest of these graphs presented. The boxes that point to different things, the illustrations within this graph, are not planned to be in every single graph for project power output, just within the illustration.
Yes.
Are you saying that for each of the sites there will not be, or there will not, for the report, that you won't be showing the actual turbine output graph for that time span, whether it's 2 weeks or whatever?
No, if I could have you look at both 12 and 13 at the same time, you'll see there are captions for figure 11 and figure 12. Those figures are not within this report. That will contain the data from this monitoring period. But the very first graph within this section will not include data from this monitoring period. It's strictly an illustration.
Another request about this particular graph is, because you're doing measurements in 1-hour increments that are pertinent to the results, could we be seeing a graph that shows something more than a light gray, maybe that's a 1/4 inch wide strip that shows a 12-hour span in there? Can it be expanded so that we can actually see what the hour increments are that this was measured over? I mean, if it was turned sideways on an 8.5 by 11 sheet, so that you can glean meaningful information without, even blowing this up, as we have done, you still can't see what the occurrence is in a 1-hour setting.
Yeah, that could potentially be done. This data is made available on another portion of the report. In the new version of the report, it would be Appendix H. This data is provided in Appendix H for every 10-minute interval. So if someone wants to dive in to say, at this time of day, what was the data, they can do that.
But that's run as a list, not as a graph.
That's run as a list, not a graph, that's correct.
Is it possible, since you have this graph, and I assume that all of the 10-minute intervals are a function of this graph to create it, can't you just blow it up so that we can see it represented in graph form? I don't mean in this example, I mean in the actual analysis results for the study.
we can play around with it. I want to see how it looks, but, right. I wanna-
Is this a graphic issue?
What's that?
What do you mean, see how it looks? Could you-
Well, for one thing, I believe you wanted to have 3 graphs stacked on top of each other. This was one of them.
Well, that doesn't mean it's the only graph.
Right, so in other words, this is, you want one of these blown up and then 2 others underneath it. So we'd have to limit the number of days and just have maybe 1 or 2 days in each
Well,
page.
if you make paper that's wider than 8 inches.
It's a matter of reproducing the stuff too. We've got 40 copies that we have to make of it. But
I'll
we-
give you
we'll
40
look-
sheets.
We'll look at it.
Sorry.
Mr. Sandier, you're
Yeah, I had one comment on it.
Sure.
Most cases when I've dealt with time data like this, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is not the normal block of time. It would be much more reasonable, I think, to make it midnight to noon, noon to midnight. If you want to do 12-hour blocks. That's, I believe, everything I've worked with is more standard than it is 7 to 7.
Yeah, I'm not sure what if there's a PSB precedent on it, but I know in Act 250 they typically define daytime in Vermont as 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So that's just why it was done. I mean, if there's any sort of precedent in Vermont, that's the Act 250 has sort of done something, but that's fine.
Even there, I disagree with how it's done.
And then, another way, another location that we would point would be to what's defined as nighttime for EPA day-night levels or WHO, and that would usually be around 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. is when nighttime starts. So, but if there's a time period that somebody wants, we can do that shading. That's fine.
I just assumed that it was the 7 p.m., 7 a.m. because it sort of reflects when people are likely to be home in the evening after work and then sleeping at night, and then by 7 a.m. most folks are up and about and going about their day. So that's my assumption, but I don't know that that's...
John, you're right. That's how EPA does it. It's based on human activity.
Right. Yes, Ms. Smith.
Can I make a comment?
I want you to state your name.
Annette Smith at Vermonters for Clean Environment. I've read these reports over the last few years, and until I saw this right here, I had no idea what those shadings meant. Until I saw it actually on here, 7. I looked at these and said, is this midnight? I don't know. I couldn't correlate it to anything else. So you're saying that you're only going to put it on one of them. I think you need to make it clear what the times are. I mean, whatever it is, because I couldn't figure it out. I looked back at other data. I think, I'm glad you put it on here, but I think you need to put it on every one.
Ms. Smith, if I may, I think the idea is to always have the illustrative graph first.
I understand that.
And then when you're looking at the actual graphs reporting the data from the most recent monitoring period, you don't have the little arrows and boxes cluttering the graph.
Well, I think as lay people look at this, as you talk about people who are looking at it for the first time, this is very, very confusing. And I think that something as simple as what does that demarcation in the line mean? It could be a key in the bottom, or there's room at the top. You could put 7 a.m., 7 p.m. I mean, I don't think it's that complicated to add. It doesn't even have to be a box, but just a time delineation seems like it'd be simple to add.
Real quick, I would point out, we didn't add this notation on figure 10. We did point out in figure 14 on the following page that the tick marks for the days are centered on midnight. That's a little bit of a help to kind of note when the start of that day is. But you're right, it doesn't note when 7 p.m. is and when 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is, other than the fact that the start of the shade is 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. and the end of the shade is 7 a.m. So you're saying that you would like some sort of ticks at the bottom showing the time instead of just dates, right?
Just put it in the legend.
Yeah, something to make it clear what it is showing. I was trying to correlate it with other information I had that was time sensitive. I had no idea what those shadings meant. And just going to a master, when you have other graphs that you're trying to dig into, I think those graphs need to say on them what it is they're showing. and not have you refer back to something else.
My view on it is anything that is helpful that doesn't interfere with presentation of the information is a good thing. So. Yes.
Is this discussion only on this representative graph for the turbine output, or is it a discussion about what the graphs of the actual results would be? I don't want to jump ahead.
Well, actually, I did have one question about the illustrative, but then how come the dots that represent the number of turbines in operation, how come they're different shades? What's that supposed to represent?
Different shades?
Yes.
They're overlapping. These are 10-minute intervals, and so there's just a lot of data on the graph, so the dots are overlapping.
Okay.
But that's a good point. One way that we could make this clear is to specifically state that these are 10-minute intervals in the graph, and so that some of the dots are overlapping.
John?
I believe she was first.
Oh, go ahead.
I think this would be a solution to your problem, is that these graphs are too small to do an analytical analysis on. If the graphs were larger, and instead of covering 12 hours in a quarter inch, that 12 hours covered 1 inch, you'd then be able to see the separation of these 10-minute interval dots, and this would all make much more sense. I think that the sizes that we've had to deal with has been a real problem for everyone. I do think that you could solve the paper problem and provide us with some meaningful information, readable information.
So I think it would be a worthwhile discussion, maybe not right now, maybe after working through it, but around the purpose of the report. And what I mean by that is the report is to report the data and essentially the results, what are the findings of the study, and provide a summary of the data that supports that. If there is interest in having detailed data so that people can conduct their own analyses, that seems like a separate issue, and that type of report could potentially be generated, or the data could be available. I don't know, but my understanding is that every bit of detail on a minute-by-minute basis is not necessarily the purpose of the report.
Well, if I might respond, if you're saying that you don't need to represent this in any clearer manner because you're just presenting a report of exceedance or no exceedance, all you would need is a cover page that says there were no exceedances.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. There's a certain amount of detail that you want to provide in a report like this, and I think that this graph provides information, maybe not at the level that that you're requesting, and that might be something that we're able to address. But it's also one thing to provide that level of detail, and then to provide no detail and just provide a conclusion. Just as an example, what do we see when we look at this graph? We can see that there are time periods, and we can see the days that that would be more of a worst case when all of the turbines are operating, or we can see when the project was at its maximum or higher power output. So that allows us to hone in on those time periods. It doesn't mean if we're interested in what happened at 12:20 p.m. on 5/20/2012 that we're going to be able to glean that data from this graph. That's not necessarily the purpose of this graph. It provides information, but it is a summary of that information.
The results are based on 1 hour increments, and I think that it would be just the right thing to do to be providing the information in here in a manner that the reader can see the results and how they correlate to each other across a graph in the 1 hour increments. I'm certainly not talking about minute to minute. but something that's large enough to be able, because if you're presenting it here, I think that we would like to see what those, instead of what 12 hours is in a quarter-inch bar, so that we can at least discern how separated these 1 hour increment periods are.
Right. I understand that. The data is made available in the appendix. I think if someone wants to dive into deeper detail or analysis on their own, it's there for them to do that. This is just a graphical representation of that data. It's not meant to, and understandably so, it's only in 3 or 4 figures, so that you're not flipping through 100 figures in the report.
Well, that would make it all the easier. You're just blowing up 3 or 4 graphs.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the data is there in the intervals that you're interested in. It's just not in graphical format.
I'm making a suggestion for the board to consider how the public might.
I think this dialogue basically demonstrates that there are some people in the world that are more visually oriented than others, and I think we have one in the room today. But I understood you earlier to say that you would take a look at possibly expanding the size of this graph, and so that would be very helpful if you can, and it can be presented in an orderly fashion that doesn't make the report turn into some giant unwieldy beast. Then that would be great. Because I do agree. I think that it would be a little helpful to your average reader to be able to see a little bit more detail in this. Mr. Ambrose.
Answer your question as to why the different shading on the turbines. I believe it's an artifact presented by Bill Gates. I believe all you'd need to do, Eddie, is to click on the data set, the brown data set, with the right button and say bring front, and it'll bring all those dots out from behind the gray.
Yeah, I understand that. I actually did that before producing this graph.
Yeah.
It's actually not Bill Gates. I think it's whoever founded Adobe PDF, because these are printed from a PDF. And when you do a PDF, it flattens the image. And for some reason, the dots that were in front of the gray shading got mixed with the gray shading when you PDF it.
Oh,
so
okay.
the word format is much more pronounced.
Yeah.
I still prefer to blame Bill Gates for most things.
I tell you, the guy's the richest man in the world on 100,000 errors.
And you still can't get a haircut, can you? All right, Mr. Duncan.
Before we move on, I'd just like to point out, in fairness, before the appearance of the graphical results, there are a number of pages with large photographs of the locations, and so some people are really interested in visually seeing the locations of the test equipment. Other people may not place great importance on that and would prefer to see larger graphs. So, just for your consideration.
Alan, did you have something?
I was just going to ask a quick question. I know there's an awful lot of data and so on, and I think, Peter, you commented that there's quite a few copies of this that get produced, but if people want that raw data so they can do with, as they wish, for analysis, what's the chances of putting a CD in the back of the packets with that data so they don't have to ask what it's right there, they can utilize it?
Seems like you're getting to Appendix H.
Well, probably, but I'm just kind of thinking ahead, because we're already talking about, that way if you wanted to plot a graph or whatever, do it.
Yeah, we do provide a CD. We'll see what else we can put on it.
Because you could put 11 by 17 charts, as Michelle is asking for, right on there or something.
Yeah.
And that would be a way to avoid the thing becoming a paper monster.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of, yeah, unless the people want their own paper on it.
Is this docket going to be incorporated into EPSB? Which I believe is going to start in the fall or by the end of the year. In other words, there will be digital filings on everything.
Oh, for folks who don't know, EPSB is the name of an electronic filing system that we're going to be implementing hopefully by the end of the year. So with the exception of a couple of types of cases or folks that don't have the ability to file electronically, we're going to be moving out of the hard copy world slowly but surely. And I believe what Ms. Smith is asking is basically whether all of the documents from this case are going to get scanned into that system so people can search for them.
Well,
see them
actually,
online.
no, I was thinking more about this particular discussion. In other words, are we just talking about like 1 or 2 hard copy reports after which the next 2 reports will be all digital anyway? In other words, is this docket going to then be picked up as part of the EPSB one where all the filings will be digital?
If a filing is made, well, actually, you know, I'm hesitant to answer that because we're going to have to figure out a transition.
I know you are, and I didn't know if you'd figured that out.
And so as I sit here today, I don't know if, for example, if you're in the middle of a docket when EPSB goes into gear, if we're suddenly just going to say, okay, everything in this docket going forward gets filed electronically, or if we'll finish out that docket in hard copy. I suspect we'll be pushing to go electronic. So if my hunch is correct, then things that would get filed in this proceeding after EPSB goes effective would get filed electronically.
So then there wouldn't be a need for a CD. It would, all the data would just be uploaded.
Presumably, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Anybody else on this topic?
Section 4.2 reports the weather and meteorology information. Again, this is a brief summary. There are more details in Appendix E and Appendix H. One thing I would point out is, so we try to, one thing we try to do to make it clearer for the readers is reiterate information that's already been said somewhere else in the report. Oftentimes, when I write, it's a habit of mine, and it's made its way into these reports before, that if I state something, it's been stated and I don't restate it. And so we're changing that in this report. So here, we specifically say where the wind, or where the weather is being monitored at. That's been stated previously in the report, but that's an example of how we're trying to reiterate that information. I guess the next one gets into the core results, so are there any comments on 4.2? Hearing none, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, and 4.6 are the core of the results. For the purposes of reviewing the report, I should mention there's 4 sections, and the reason there's 4 sections is that there's 4 monitoring locations. So for our purposes here, let's look at section 4.4, which is meant to represent Eden Road, monitor site B. At the beginning of 4.4, we give a summary of the data that's to come in section 4.4. Not a summary, but we tell you what's about to come. And then in section 4.4.1, we go over the background method 3 analysis. We state what graphics we're referring to, and then we provide what the highest sound level is. Actually, we provide what the range of sound levels for method 3 were, and then what the highest sound level was. And we provide the specific date and time that the highest sound level occurred, and the figure that you can look to see that highest level in time. As with the project activity graph, we similar to that, we also provide an illustrative graph for this. This illustrative graph currently is planned to only be in the first section of method 3 results. The illustrative graph would not be in every method 3 section for each site, but it's enough for the user to understand the information that's provided in the graph. If everyone could look at figure 14, the vertical axis on the left represents the sound pressure level. The horizontal axis represents time. The orange dots are 1 hour turbine-only sound levels. Part of the shading on this is the fact that they are overlapping a little bit for method 3. We point out that what the shaded areas represent, what the start time of the tick mark is for each date, but we'll, as we discussed earlier, we'll look for ways to clear that up a little bit. And then we also point out in this graph, you'll see that there's data missing. This is data that's omitted per the monitoring protocol as discussed earlier. But one thing that we're trying to do to make that clearer is in Appendix D, while we've provided in previous reports the amount of time that's omitted for a specific reason. In Appendix D, we'll actually provide timestamps for every single occurrence of rain, every single occurrence of anomalous sound sources. That's going to be a tabular format in Appendix D, so if someone's interested in what happened on any given day, they can go in and look at that timestamp and the reason for why it's omitted from that graph. Two other major changes to this report. One, we do provide a red 45 decibel CPG limit line in this graph now, so you can see if the 1 hour turbine only levels exceed that at any time. And then in addition to that, we used to have the 10-minute LEQ background and the 10-minute LEQ primary sound levels in line format over top of this. We've tried to clean that up. That data's always been available also in the time history results in the appendix. So since it's already there, we tried to clear it up, and so this graph is meant to represent what's the 1 hour turbine only sound levels, as opposed to the 10-minute data for the entire period. And if people are interested in seeing that, it's still there. It's still in the appendices for them to go look at it.
So you will be presenting this graph for each of the sites in combination, I'm hoping, in the format of the compilation that I provided to you, so that we can then see, now that you've separated out those two other critical elements to the graph, we'll be able to look down the page and see how the events correlate to each one of these different measurements.
Yes, assuming that we incorporate this, I'm just not making a promise, but I'm going to try to incorporate something like this. Assuming I do this, it would be the middle graph here, the difference being that this 10-minute background and 10-minute primary LEQ would not be here. This is the same data that is contained in this graph here. So this graph would be like figure 14, except it would just be the dots.
One quick comment, I've read ahead a little bit. The explanatory illustration here, you said that you weren't going to repeat it, but are you going to put a reference to it in each of the other sites?
I hadn't planned to, but that's a great idea.
I think it should, because if you're not going to put it there, then you need to say, see the explanatory graph of section.
So if you're only interested in Eden Road or, another
Then you know
site.
where to go and find it. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
That's a good idea.
This is where I may be stepping on the toes of the protocol, and I apologize if I do. But when I have data that I have two data sets, the primary and the background, and I'm shown only one set, I have no ability to make a judgment on my own based on the two data sets that were used. And when I end up seeing all these sound level measurements that are less than 45 dBA, fine. When I end up seeing an area blocked out and I don't know what's measured, I'm going, what's being hidden? If you end up showing it, you say contaminated by wind, contaminated by rain, fine. But when data is missing, it raises red flags for me. And if and to go back, that primary and the background, those two are very important bits of information. And I would like to see it presented, but that's up to the board.
So what you're saying is you would like to see the primary and background
Plotted together.
in this particular graph,
Right.
along with the turbine only.
And then you see how they interact in there, because we're only dealing with data. So I'll only deal with data. I'd like to see the data.
With respect to your comment about the missing data, what's going on here, they do have to file a second supplemental report that does contain Well, it's not all of the omitted data, it's the data from times below 14 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, they are allowed to omit that data under the monitoring protocol.
Yeah, but that 14 degrees, that's the ANSI standard.
Right.
Many manufacturers have instruments that can go lower than that in that environmental condition.
Which is why the board required them to file a supplemental, and in fact, their witness in the case, Mr. Polisky, testified that he has often taken measurements below 14 degrees that he was comfortable with, so that's why we included it as a supplemental requirement.
Oh, yes, and it's tough. I mean, you're trying to make a judgment. You're trying to say, am I seeing all the data? What's missing? And the judgments made by the provider of the report, are they consistent? Are they valid? And can they be verified? And that's a big important.
If I may, all of the data from the background of the primary monitors are available in the report. They're in the time history results. So if one wants to see how the background and the primary compare versus time, they're all on the same graph already. They're just not in the method 3 results graph. But if we were to put them in this graph, it's the same representation that's already in the appendix and the time history results. In addition to that, in the time history results, we present not only the data used for the method 3 analysis, but also the omitted data is contained in the appendix in those graphics. It's just a different shade, so you can see what data is included in the analysis and what data is omitted, all on the same graph.
Right, I noticed that. You know, Mr. Ambrose, for me, one of the problems with putting everything in one graph is that it can be a little overwhelming. I don't have your training and experience, and like sitting there trying to figure out like how the things go together. I like your suggestion of having the graphs adjacent to each other, because it's easier for me to get my head around graph 1 and then compare it to graph 2, which I can get my head around. The same with graph 3, but you compress them all together, and I'm in a
Okay, I'll concede that to you, and it's a very valid point. My feeling is, whenever I have data that exceeds that 45, I want to see it. And then I want to be able to see what is the decision to make this, to exclude these measurements. And then you have the secondary graph. But to plot all the data, and you can highlight it saying environmental or whatever, excluded. But to end up seeing how high the measurements actually went, because when I look at this data, they're not quite quiet. Yet when I end up seeing snippets of it, wow, that thing's loud. So I don't get the feeling I'm being shown everything in proper context.
But I think the data you're talking about, I think, is what we were just discussing, that it is in graphs in the
Appendix E.
Appendix E, and it does. I mean, there are times when those lines spike
That's
up
like
pretty
being a
impressive.
lawyer. You must understand contracts. It's all in the fine print. Right?
But no, I agree. There are some times when those lines spike up pretty high. And,
Yeah.
but I think we have to keep in mind when we're looking at those that those aren't turbine-only lines.
That's
my understanding of that.
That's outside of what I've been told I can speak about, but that's a good discussion we can have. But I can't think of anything else out there that would spike above that level.
No,
I also want to reiterate the transparency in the omitted data. So while the omitted data is graphed in Figure 3 Figure E, or excuse me, Appendix E for people to see, Appendix D now provides timestamps for all of that omitted data. They are short enough in time intervals that it's really too much to throw. Even if we blew the graphic up, we might have 1 minute of a dog barking, and so to point at 1 minute in a graph of a dog barking is kind of difficult to do. So, but we do provide timestamps for all of that in Appendix D now. That is new, that hasn't been provided in previous reports, but for transparency's sake, we're providing all those timestamps.
Yes.
Just to remind Andy and that having this information in a format that is easily discernible what's going on in any 1 hour increment also can allay people's concern that there is a problem. The more you see and the more you can see that there is a non-issue, the more comfortable people can become with the results. So you're going to have to weigh, I think, how you think people are going to use this information. I'd like you to think about it more in a positive manner, that the more people see and the more that people understand, the less chance there is for a misinterpretation. And if you can see graphs that are actually in a time frame that show the 24 little increments of a day, and then you can relate it down a sheet to all the other events going on, and there's an appendix that shows all of the incidents that require an exclusion, I think that you're going to find life is easier.
Thank you. Other comments on method 3, 4.4.1? Method 4.4, or excuse me, method 2, section 4.4.2, generally has remained unchanged. We had proposed to do a table format as opposed to a graph format, but I think the graph format is something worth looking at and graphing out to see how that's represented. I would be interested in knowing, because some people are more graphically interfaced and some people are more tabular interfaced, but would people be interested in seeing those results in both formats, or one format in one location and one format in another, or just are people interested generally in switching to one format or another?
I think that the suggestion of having a CD.
Well, and I think you commented earlier, Eddie, that you might put the graphical one as part of the report, but then in the appendices put the tabular one. I think you need to be consistent. If you're going to show one site graphically, then show them all graphically, and then have them all in the appendices tabular, but don't mix them up.
Yeah, I guess that you put it in a graph form in the report, and then you could just have a little note at the bottom of the graph that says tabular version of this is an appendix.
Whatever,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. Because I would strongly believe that the tabular is already there, that you've taken the tabular and put it in graphical format.
That's right, yes. The graphical format has not been produced for method 2.
Right.
Yeah. Any other comments on method 2? Section 4.4.3 is the tonality analysis. We discussed this briefly already. This section generally remains unchanged except for the fact that we note if someone's reading the graphical format of this, that if one of those blue bars exceeds the gray line, which is the ANSI tonality definition, then it would be defined as a prominent discrete tone.
Yes.
Eddie, I just noticed you have a legend at the top and it shows worst case tonality. What makes that worst case?
We picked the graph that has the bars come closest to the tonality definition. So there might be time periods where there's a little more tonality in another frequency than another.
So this is the worst case of the 10-minute averages.
This is the worst case of all of the method 2 shutdown periods.
All of method 2,
Yeah.
and that's based on 10-minute
That's
averages?
based on 1 hour.
1 hour?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm even more concerned now.
I'd like to define too as to what it's based on. Because I agree with Mr. Ambrose that that's 1 hour can be a real major factor.
I understand your concern completely.
Yeah, because it's like, I'm gonna shoot a starting pistol in here, and I'm gonna measure the sound level for an hour.
Probably for jail though. Sorry, pistol here.
Okay, I'm gonna take my cell phone and go crack the whip.
It is defined in the methodology section of 3.3.3, but we could
But I think it
reiterate.
needs to be reiterated at the graphical point too, because you're gonna look at it and you're gonna wonder, where did it come from? And quite frankly, a small, even if it's relatively fine print, but put it right with the graph too, so people can.
I look at this and I go, oh, have we got a GE 1.5 here? I mean, that's the signature of a GE turbine, so. 160 hertz, I mean, it's its fingerprint.
Well, these are Vestas, a little over 3, I believe.
Are these a, what are they?
V112.
Ah, yeah, okay, and then
Similar.
That'll do it.
Same
Similar thing.
Similar fingerprint, huh?
fingerprint.
So that is all of the results, unless there are other comments on the tonality. That is just repeated for each monitoring location. And then we go into section 5, which is the short-term attendant monitoring. This is a section that was only included in the last report, the fall 2013 report, and will also be included in the winter 2014 report. We continued to do attendant monitoring in the winter 2014 session, so that's why it's included in this. My understanding is that we'll probably include the attendant monitoring in the winter 2014 period, and so this will only be produced, again, my understanding, in the winter 2014 report, and then after that, this section will not be included. This section remains unchanged from the last report. We try and provide a description as to what those graphs, what data you're looking at in the graphs. The graphs are large, they're blown up, and so they're in the appendix. They're not contained here, but we do provide a textual summary of the experience of the attended listener and the levels that are represented in the graphs in the appendix within this section here. Are there any questions on that section? Section 6 is exceedances of the CPG limit. The purpose of this section is to either state whether or not there is CPG limits were exceeded, and if there were, to go into more detail as to what may have happened when there is a limit. And so this section here, you can see, is short right now. This section, when it was when there were exceedances earlier on, was expanded beyond what is included here. At least textually, I do not remember if there were graphs in those reports.
Yeah, I believe it was textual information regarding what GMP believes to be alcohol.
So you're saying there were no exceedances, that's why this report is done?
Well, this report isn't representing any specific period.
Well, I thought that's
so.
just what you just said.
No, this report was the fall 2013 report, and then reduced down to essentially what I call a shell, which is just the graphics that we're trying to enhance
Oh,
to.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but I thought you just said there were no exceedances.
And this is the exact copy of what was in the fall 2013 report. So in the fall 2013 monitoring session, there were no exceedances. So this is just a copy from the fall 2013 report.
Would it clarify things to say, if in any given sound monitoring report there were no exceedances, this is what it would look like? conversely, if there was a time when there were exceedances, it would look like the fall 2012 report or something like that.
Eddie, how about a footnote? I'm thinking going all the way back now to the executive summary. With a footnote where you mentioned there were exceedances or were not, that there should be just a footnote reference to this section in the report. That way, if there were exceedances, people can flip to that section to see what they were from the executive summary. And I think
Footnote
that's,
is in the executive summary.
yeah, footnote in the executive referencing to that piece, because I think that's going to be one of the pieces people are going to look for first.
Yes.
This is related to exceedances or not, and goes back to the statement that in the spring 2013 about the inadequacy of method 3 to determine the background sound levels, and this I would hope that the board would not want to scrap method 3, but since the processes that you are using that are represented in these graphs and the amount of data that gets eliminated because of the ambient sound interference, the wind, etc., on the microphone, would it be reasonable for the board to request that RSG look at changing or improving your measuring processes under method 3 so that you actually end up with an adequate result and ability to measure the background sound rather than continue down the line that we're on now? I think this is the 4th sound test that has been done under your statement that method 3 does not produce adequate results. I don't know, it seems illogical to me that we, as the public and the board and the department, would just keep using a measurement system that is not producing adequate results from your state. Is this time to say maybe we need you to look at how you actually get correct, adequate results using a method 3, but a different process of measuring?
Yeah, that's definitely outside of what we're trying to do today, but, you know, some of the comments that we've heard today, you know, Mr. Nauer and I certainly sit down and talk with the board, and, you know, the board has jurisdiction over Green Mountain Power, and so, you know, I can't speak for the board members, obviously, as I sit here today, but if there's a way to improve the accuracy of the results, I would say feel free to propose it to the board, propose a change in the protocol. I mean, I would assume that you want the most accurate results possible. But for now, you know, we are where we are in terms of what was improved factor in the case, in the substance of the case. So, but yeah, it would be nice if we could get it a little bit more accurate.
How do we get those issues addressed? We feel there's true discrepancies in their report. How do we go about getting those addressed? I know this today is not the place, but tell me how you do it.
I don't know what you mean by discrepancies in their report.
Well, I think Michelle has gone through their report inside and out and has found exceedances in their graphs, and there's questions.
Well, I want to make it clear that I'm not bringing up those issues that made me wonder, because there seemed to be no good reason for a turbine only, not to be being reported. That is certainly an issue for me, but it is not the subject of this discussion. Although it comes back to actually a primal point about the graphs that we're looking at and the information that we're getting that's being graphed. Is it worth this effort if the information itself by the admission of RSG is not adequate in their words? It seems to me that the effort that's going into the drafting and the communication of this information to the department, the board, the public, is wasted time and money. If we're not getting information that when we get the results are meaningful, which is, goes back to my first request, that in this information, that if they, as you state, if the information cannot adequately be recorded with the process that's being used at the moment, should we be getting some kind of an adjustment, some kind of a margin of error to judge this information by, or, which would be another step outside of this discussion, should the board request that you bring them a process under method 3 that does produce adequate results. Nothing's going to be perfect, or nothing will ever be 100%, but from the statement that you make, it sounds as though the accuracy level would be below 50% when you say that it's not adequate. Not adequate would mean to me that you have less than a 50% chance of accuracy. I'd certainly like to know that what I'm reading is meaningful. So it comes down to the basic element. Is this information that you're going to a lot of time and trouble to graph and record and represent to us, is it meaningful to start with?
I think this is also why, we have method 2 and method 3. They do act as a check on each other to some extent. I do understand your concerns. And with respect to your question, if you think after reviewing the report that there's information in the report that shows a violation and that they have concluded that there is no violation, then that can be brought to the attention of the board. And if the board thought that there was grounds to investigate, then the board would open an investigation and look at it.
Thank you.
May I
Yes,
just
sure.
comment on this? Based on my years of experience, what happens is the number 3, measurement method 3, will negate any exceedance of method 2 by design.
Well, if these folks record an exceedance under method 2, but don't record an exceedance under method 3 for the same time period, they violated their CPG and they get penalized based on the outcome of method 2. You don't use one method to negate the other. And it flows in the other direction. If you pick up an exceedance under method 3, but you don't pick it up under method 2,
No.
not sure that would happen.
Method 2 is always going to method 3 will always undermeasure method 2.
Right. And if method 2 picks up an exceedance, that's considered a violation, regardless of what method 3 says.
I would suggest we're getting a little far afield.
Yes.
We weren't prepared to discuss this, but we will certainly analyze the issue, provide our analysis of it, and then other folks can react to that, and if they want something else done, then they're free to propose it. But I would suggest that you give us a chance to assimilate these comments and provide our analysis.
That makes sense, and that's very helpful, Mr. Zamor. I appreciate you and your client's willingness to do that.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm on topic or not, but I'll try. The last report that came out, Shirley Nelson had done monitoring at the same time, and I understand the board has sort of said, for whatever reasons, they don't value her monitoring. I do value her monitoring because she is there, she's listening, and she is scrupulous in not putting the sound monitor out when there's any ground level wind. So when that report came out, I pulled up her diary, the monitoring she had done, and then I compared it to what was in the report. And for 3 specific time periods where she monitored over 45 dBA for over an hour, that data was all excluded by RSG. Coincident with that was her written report of why she put the monitor out. She was getting headaches and things like that. So to me, what that says is that there is a question about the data that's being excluded. And while I think it's important to put in the reasons, for instance, that have been discussed, there's not enough transparency in these reports right now to understand why the data is excluded, except that the protocol allows them to exclude data whenever the background monitor shows noise levels above 45 or something like that. So I don't think this is just about the protocol that was set up, though. I think that there are real questions about RSG's ability to exclude data without giving reasons in the report, and I guess what I'm hearing is that they're saying that they will now provide those reasons for why it was excluded. But it's very concerning to me when I see what I consider to be credible exceedance levels 3 different times, at least, that were just completely tossed. And surely wouldn't have put the monitor out had it not been a good time for monitoring. And I guess the background monitor showed levels that gave them enough excuse to toss it. And so this method 3 business really is important to understand how that may be contaminating the information that is being used by RSG.
Right, I understand.
You understand what I'm saying?
We definitely are a little far afield
Okay.
on that, and again, that's why there's method 2, though. The court reporter's fingers need a rest. So,
She has been, that's amazing.
we're going to go off the record and take a 10-minute break. So let's be back at 24, okay? And then hopefully we can keep moving. I think we can do it fairly well. So.
The hearing officer said something.
I try to be on time.
You do? Yeah.
Isn't the hearing officer the timekeeper?
Exactly.
Okay, let's go back in the record. And I guess we were discussing section 6. Ms. Marathli?
Yes, you.
So we were chatting about section 6 and any more comments on we really need to keep to the presentation of information in the report because we're running pretty late, so. Okay.
Sure. So, section 7, conclusions, largely remains unchanged. Provides a nice brief summary of the highest monitored sound levels, whether or not there were exceedances, and there's an error in this one. There should be a 4th bullet point there. But attended monitoring summarization is also contained within the conclusions.
For clarity, it would be the sentence about attended monitoring, that would be number 4.
Yes, that would be number 4. And that will occur in the winter 2014 report.
Probably want to leave that there though in this case, not pertinent, whatever we say it might be.
Sure. Section A is the Appendix A is the terminology primer. This also remains unchanged, other than the fact that it's moved from the main body of the report to the appendices. I am open to feedback on it if anyone has any.
I have a small point. On page 2 of the appendix, you note 20 micropascals. I know what a micropascal is. I don't think the average reader knows what that is. So if you could say this is the SI unit for pressure level, or however you want to define it, but
Sure.
I think it would be helpful.
That's on a standard international.
International standard unit.
Yeah,
So we should find that out.
too.
Always good to define every term.
Most people are not going to do the calculations, but in case sometime.
The only other thing that kind of bothers me a little bit, and it's very minor, is let's take for instance on page 2, we say the equivalent average sound level, LEQ. Well, it's LEQ, with the small EQ, as you've defined in the equation down below. To me, the two should kind of equate themselves, because you've capitalized it, and I understand that as a title. But it really, if you look in the equation, people say, well, wait a minute, is what they're talking about the same thing? Because oftentimes in engineering and sciences and so on, a capital letter is different than what a small case letter might be.
The LEQ in the text is the same thing that's in the equation, so I'm just confused by what you're referring to.
All right, if you look at, for instance, on the second line.
Oh, I see.
L with a lowercase EQ.
Yep.
If you look in the equation, L lowercase EQ.
Yes.
But in the title to that
Yeah.
section, it's L capital EQ.
That's a report's default. Yeah, I can fix that.
Yeah, and I think that carries through several of the definitions here. Maybe a picky point, but if someone's not familiar with these terms, and back to Tom's comment, let's make sure we've got them clear for everybody.
Other questions in Appendix A? Appendix B is the project description. This also largely remains unchanged. The project hasn't changed, so it's the same description. The exception is that this used to be in the main body of the report. We have added a section to the project description that provides the compliance reporting history, section B4. It seemed to be the best place that it fit in, other than giving it its own appendix. So.
I think that was a nice touch, by the way. If you want to know what's gone before, you've got it right there.
Section C is the information that is about methodology. It's the information that was included in the main body of the report under methodology before, but to trim down that section, some of it has been moved to section C, appendix C. That includes a description per the monitoring protocol of method 2 and method 3, and then also the description of the equipment. Most readers probably don't care about the equipment, but it's something that should be in the report, and it is it's here for their reference. And then a new section within Appendix C is C.3, which talks about the identification of sources through spectrograms that we talked about earlier. And I'm happy to go into an explanation or a detail, but that's a new section. And then the last part of C is the NRO plan. That per the monitoring protocol, we need to provide that information on the NRO schedule, and so it's here, it's just in the appendix.
Mr. Duncan, I have a comment on the spectrograms.
Okay.
You referenced in the paragraph, the second sentence, the intensity of color represents the level of sound at that frequency. There can be intense blue colors, intense red colors, so I think it would be helpful to give a little bit more characterization or qualification of what colors represent what.
Sure.
Need a legend.
I'm thinking in one of your reports you've actually shown a little color bar graph onto one side, which gives that information. That would be helpful to include it there as well.
Is that what you mean by legend, what Mr. St. Peter just mentioned?
Yes, yes, the fact that some way to, it's like a color thermometer.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, if you look at any one of them, this is in the latest report.
Yeah, after it's attached to the margin.
Attached to the margin.
Ms. Smith, would you like to handle it?
On page 8, at the first reference to the monitoring protocol, I'm aware the board has now posted the monitoring protocol on its website, so it might be helpful to put a footnote with a link to that.
And because this is appendices, I'm also suggesting that maybe there should be some kind of a reference as to where these methods came from. I mean, these are defined methods as I understand it in measurement protocols. They're just referenced that they're from Yancey or whatever you might have derived from them, because there were like 5s, I believe, and the CPG and so on narrowed it down in the protocols.
So, yeah, the protocol said use 1, and if that didn't work, then use 2 and 3.
Right.
And that, yeah, so
And I
we
think
could
there was a reference as to the source of some
Okay.
point. Minor point, but to me, appendices is the extra detail that we're looking for.
And if you go and search for the link to the board's webpage that has the protocol posted, if you go to our main webpage on the left, there's a couple of tabs up near the top running down the left-hand side of the screen, and there's one that says, I'm probably going to get this not exactly right, but for the public.
For the public, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you click on that, and then you'll find a link to go to the monitoring protocol.
And you're not going to move that anytime soon?
No, that's not good.
I've asked that the winter operating protocol be put on there too, but it hasn't been. But that would be another thing to
Oh, okay.
put in.
Any other questions or comments on Appendix C?
Do we have any data that shows the effectiveness of NRO? Where the 3 dB reduction comes from and the 2 dB?
Where that information comes from?
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes from the manufacturers, so you
Yeah,
can
but
reference,
would you?
reference where it comes from.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I have not been able to find that NRO data. So, and I'm also hesitant for NRO data working in areas where there's high wind shear. So, it may be implemented, but whether it's effective or not, remains unknown.
So we'll add a reference to that.
Or just put in the off-the-band test data.
Appendix D, this simply states that for the purposes of this shell, that this appendix provides tables of timestamps for wind data and medicines, the compliance analysis due to high winds, rain, anomalous sound sources, and temperature below 14 degrees Fahrenheit. So the tables aren't here, but there will be a separate table for rain, a separate table for wind, and there will be a timestamp from X time to Y time. This data was excluded for this reason.
To clarify my understanding, high winds at the microphone, is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
That needs to be. Maybe just a quick comment too as to where that 14 degrees F comes from. I think we've talked about that before. That kind of goes back to my comment, I think, in the very first part of the executive summary, that was a piece in there that really wasn't part of the executive summary, but you might want to move that paragraph under the 14-degree piece of it here to Appendix D.
Okay. The paragraph is also in section 3.3 for data processing.
Right, but I'm just thinking that because this is another piece, it's easy to just put it in there too, so people have got it right in front of them.
This is,
You look like you're ready to say something.
yeah, this chart has always bothered me, no matter what report it's in. The,
Which chart are you on?
Appendix E-1, time history results.
So we jumped to Appendix E officially.
I'm sorry, I thought we were already there, I apologize.
Yeah. Now, we were just looking at Appendix D, which was...
Okay, I apologize.
I think we're on Appendix E now, so...
Go ahead.
I'll let Eddie introduce it.
So Appendix E is the time history results for every monitoring period. I think one thing, we try and define what time history graphs are. If someone just says time history graphs, you might not completely understand. So we say in the text what is included in a time history graph, which is all of the sound level data in 10-minute intervals for each monitor every day. In addition to that, on this graph, we also provide wind speed data, which is collected at the microphone. We also provide the average power output of the turbines nearest to that specific site. So the turbines that have the most effect on the sound at that site. So, you know, turbine 1, and I think this is probably something that we should explain a little more clearly before this graph. But turbine 1, turbine 1 is that one? Okay. So turbine 21 has little to no effect on farm road. So turbine 21 is not included in the average power output for the farm road monitor because if it's at full power or no power, it doesn't really affect. It's kind of extra data that doesn't add meaning.
That would be good to explain which turbines are included in which sites.
News to me.
Because that's, to me, always been a question.
Right, so as you go through the results for each individual site, you would just have at the beginning
Which
turbines that were included in
which
this
ones are
analysis.
included in that analysis,
Sure.
exactly.
Okay.
All the way through the report.
So we provide a description of what each line is in the graph. This is an example where the graph is crowded, but most people want to see the background versus the primary, so that's at least 2 lines there. And then it makes sense to include microphone wind speed so that people can see that in fact there is high winds at microphone height for omitted periods, or that the sound level at the microphone is correlated with the microphone, the sound level of the microphone is correlated with the wind speeds of the microphone in some cases. And also the average power output is pertinent so that people can readily compare the sound levels versus the power output. We try and describe what each color means in the bullets section. We also have 2 axes on this graph, like the project output graphs in the main body of the report. And so we explain in each bullet what axes is in reference to what colored line. I think we can probably color the axes like we did before in some form or another. It's a little tricky since there are 2 lines referring to the sound pressure level axes and two different colored lines referring to the right vertical axes, but we might be able to come up with something that will work.
It's hard to see the dim data on this curve, this graph, because that's where you end up seeing exceedances, but it's been dimmed, so it's been excluded. I wish there was another way we could show that line, maybe dotted or something, but to still have the same intensity on it. And I know the number of points you're graphing and all this bit, you can end up putting a skip in so that it's parsed. But this is, you see the data, the blue data, which is the LEQ primary, goes up to 50 dBA. Background, LEQ, well, minimum L10 minimum background, and the primary is the wind turbine data. See, they're the same. They're tracking together.
Would it be helpful if the invalid data lines were the same intensity except on a different graph? So you would have one graph of the data that's included in the analysis and one data that's excluded?
No, this is a continuous measurement, and a bigger graph would probably, which we've talked about, would probably help. Rotating it 90 degrees would provide even a bigger space. But this is where you end up looking at the fact that the primary and the background data are actually tracking one another. They're measuring the same noise level. And this is why, when I look at this curve, I go, there's no way you're going to get an exceedance when your ambient microphone is supposed to be excluding wind turbine noise, measures the same. So either the turbine is very loud, or both microphones are being exposed to excessive wind. But the way you can exclude the excessive wind at the microphone, and you have a Larson-Davis 831, and it has a wind speed input that enables you to inhibit measurements when the wind speed exceeds the microphone's capabilities.
This technical talk.
I know, but
Yeah,
I'm just
no,
saying,
no, no.
but this is where the tire meets the road. Here I can visually see exceedances, and I see levels that get above 50, and even later on, I have levels that are even higher.
Right now, are you referring to the darker orange or darker?
The light orange is the data that's been excluded.
Right. The darker orange is the primary microphone. And you're saying that when it goes above 45, that represents an exceedance?
Yes.
But that's not turbine-only sound, is it?
It's not.
Okay.
And how do we know that?
Because it's the primary monitor, and the primary monitor is turbine plus background under the protocol.
Turbine plus background. And
It's everything.
agree. And what's the background?
The background would be the LEQ 10-minute background. That's
The
the way I
blue.
read this.
That'd be the blue.
Right.
So that should be without wind turbine noise. Yet, when I look at the early morning of the 11, 14, 13, I can see that the LEQ primary and the LEQ background are tracking fairly close to one another, and they're above 45.
Yeah, I'm not, that's not how I read this chart, but you're the expert. But the question for us today is is there a way to improve the presentation of this information so people can understand it?
Well, this gets to the point that monitoring background is not possible. That
Right,
is-
and Mr. Ambrose, I'm sorry, I don't.
I agree. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
I understand, but I mean, if you're trying to say where is the problem in this,
Yeah, I
it
do.
remains unsaid.
I understand your concerns. No, we've chatted about it, and I do understand your concerns. But I think we really just need to keep to the purpose of today, because we are running out of time, and we have a couple of appendices to get through. So
Yeah. No, I understand, and I apologize
No,
to
it's
the
okay.
board. I really.
No apology needed, sir. Yes.
One of the things that I find a little difficult, I mean, I'm not colorblind, but I know people who are. But the bottom line, which I guess I would describe as sort of a grayish blue, Is that the average power output?
Yes, that's the average power output of the turbines closest to the monitoring location.
So where's the scale to show, on which scale is that?
The heading for that scale is on the right vertical axis for average power output.
Okay, so I guess I'd like to see that somehow made clearer. I think you discussed the number of turbines operating. I think specifically which turbines are operating would be helpful, but
Yes, I think that a suggestion along those lines was made by Mr. St. Peter, and
Yeah,
they're going to get it in there. For each monitoring location, they're going to indicate which turbines are incorporated into the graph, because the turbines that are farthest away, their power output doesn't really matter because they're far enough away that it's not going to affect the sound levels.
well, actually, I'm not sure that's true, but regardless of that, I'm just looking at this presentation. I don't have any context. In other words, where's the maximum on this graph? Where's the high, this is showing something that's under 5 if the scale is on the right. Is that right?
They're 3 megawatt turbines, and so you would never have a maximum above 3 megawatts. It's the average power output.
In megawatts, all right.
Megawatts.
So could you put a line on there that showed the maximum power output as at 3 megawatts, for instance? So just like these, we need a 45 line on this, not just between 40 and 50. The key lines that matter, I mean, for the decibels, there's...
But these are not turbine-only sound levels, and so the CPG limit relative to these levels is not, comparable.
You don't think it's relevant to put 45 on here? On
No,
this
they're
graph?
not comparable. The CPG dictates what are the turbine-only sound levels and whether or not they exceed 45 or not. This graph doesn't represent turbine-only sound levels, so you would be comparing these levels to 45 decibels, yes, but not turbine-only levels to the CPG limit.
I'm afraid the turbine-only levels don't mean as much to me as the standard is 45, and I think it should be on all the graphs. But
I would respectfully disagree. I think professionally you should compare apples to apples, and the apples to apples is that the CPG limit is based off of a turbine-only sound level, so you should compare that red line limit to turbine-only sound levels.
so could you put something on that showed the 3 megawatt line or whatever the maximum is?
And we need to make it clear that it is a per turbine average power output. I apologize about that.
So does that mean when the gray line sort of disappears, all the turbines are off?
It means that the average power out, not all the turbines, all of the turbines closest to that monitoring location are not producing power.
That does raise an issue in my mind, because if all of those that are closest to a monitoring site are off, then I think there could be impacts of the remaining turbines if they were on for whatever reason.
Yeah, that data's available. It's just
I
it's
understand
what you're
it's
trying
available,
to
but,
it's what you're trying to represent. I think it's most meaningful to know what the power output is of the closest turbines. If you were to say what's the average power output of all the turbines from the project, the closest turbines might not be producing.
I understand that,
anything.
yeah. And it would probably mean adding an extra line on there or something. As Josh says, that is available. So.
How do you determine closest turbines?
Well, that goes back to the question we asked earlier. Which ones are considered?
Right, that's what I was asking Eddie.
Yeah, we'll include in the report what the closest turbines are in the data.
Yeah, but do you end up saying turbines that are within so many feet, or turbines that are, sound levels drop off at 6 dB per doubling of distance. So you would end up saying, okay, all turbines within 1,200 to 2,400 feet. Because that's one doubling of distance.
Which turbines are included in the graphs was determined in fall of 2012. So I don't know the exact methodology off the top of my head right now. We would have to check.
Yeah, but see, the thing is a turbine has to be 10 dB quieter than the nearest turbine not to be added into it.
I understand, yes.
But just for my clarity too, and the sound recordings are just taking in the whole plant.
Yes, the sound recordings are taking into account the entire plant. The wind speed is strictly from that monitoring location, and the average power output is the average power output of the closest turbines to that.
And then there's the other table, which maybe these are gonna be the ones that stack, I don't know, but that show
Yeah.
total plant output, total number of turbines running, so you can get a sense through there.
Because, the thing is, you want to keep it easy. You want to end up presenting data that is close to where you have to make a judgment. We don't need to look at data that's good, per se, when it's really good by more than 10 dB. I mean, it's like when you do condition monitoring on pieces of equipment. Don't tell me when you're healthy. Tell me when you're starting to get a worn bearing and start to squeak. Then I'll go look at you. But I mean, this is what we need is you going out there collecting so much data, and I must admit, probably 20 out of 30 days, there's no problem. But it's those 10 days that occur during that 30-day period where we could be having an event or two within those 10 days. But, because I don't know how you do it, go through this gigabytes of data. I mean, it is huge files, and I'm impressed with one's patience.
Are there any other comments on Appendix E?
I just have a question. Do you have a graph that has turbine sound only?
Yes, that's the method 3 analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only comment I had on this, and there was even a little confusion in the room here, is that maybe you need a comment in here that clarifies that this graph does not represent turbine-only sound.
Thank you.
Because if somebody reads it and doesn't realize that, then they're going to be going, wow, this thing is violating the CPG right and left, when whether or not it is or is not, your average person can't tell from this graph. Maybe somebody who's very experienced, like Mr. Ambrose, can look at the primary and the background lines on this and come to some sort of conclusion. But I
When they come together, they're measuring the same thing.
Appendix F is the full Method 2 compliance analysis results. This is an expanded version of the tables that's contained in the main body of the report. To kind of keep the report short, we only include the periods where sound levels exceed 40 decibels within the main body of the report, assuming that those are the periods that people care about primarily. And then the rest of those shutdown periods are located in this appendix. Depending on how we do it with the graphic interface, well, I guess even if we do that graphic interface, we're still going to provide it in tabular format here. This also includes the periods above 40 decibels. It's just the full data set for Method 2. Any questions on Appendix F?
Is method 2 used a lot?
Method 2 is used for the entire monitoring period, whenever there's a turbine shutdown. So every day, how many shutdowns? 5 or 6 shutdowns per day, so it's the hour before or hour after that shutdown. And that's not just daytime, it's daytime and nighttime. Appendix G is the attended monitoring results. They're not included here. If there are questions about, I guess there was a graphic in the fall 2013 report for this, that, and the way that it's oriented is that it tells you what sounds were heard by the attended listener, and it shows that time synced with sound level and with wind speed and with spectrograms. So kind of those stacked graphs that some people would like to see. That's how the attended monitoring results have been presented. But it's just not in the shell. I just didn't think to do it. So, are there any questions about what would be included in Appendix G?
Just
what's the length of time that there's usually one that is attended?
Yeah, the attended monitoring is conducted for about an hour and 20 minutes. At times when the sound power output from the project is expected to be highest.
Is that at night?
It may or may not necessarily. It may be, it may not be.
I think I'd like to see a little bit more narrative. I think the first time that you guys did the report with the attended monitoring, there was hardly any narrative at all. And I see there's a little more in this, in the other section of it, but what time you arrived, what you heard when you arrived, what, you know, a lot more description, you know, every 5-10 minutes, make a note in the diary, what is it you're hearing?
Yeah. That narrative that's in this report actually is a copy of the narrative that's in the fall 2013 report with the exclusion of like references to figures. So,
Did you do one in the previous report?
the previous report is the fall 2013 report.
I mean, the one before that, though.
No, fall 2013 was the first
Was the
time
first
that
one?
attended
Yeah.
monitoring had been conducted.
Well, it just seems a little weak on descriptive.
Yes, and describe when you arrived, when you left, when you want, what did you hear?
All right,
And
so
as
I
you-
believe we do give a general description of the sources that were heard and the primary sources that were heard. And then in the appendix, there's a list of all of the sources that are heard, time synced actually.
Yeah, because you want to end up, what is the dominant or the controlling noise source, if there is one, and what are the secondary ones that they contribute, but they come and go, and things like that, because it's, you want to get a feeling in a few words, you can say it in about 2 sentences, what the acoustic environment was like.
And I understand that. I would encourage you to read the section on attended monitoring rules. I believe we provided a summary. We can try and make it more robust.
Yeah.
The other question I would have on those spectrograms,
Yeah.
Are they available in a more expanded version?
I don't know what you mean by available. I mean, we have
Well,
them,
yeah.
but we don't publish them because most people don't care. I mean, they're more confusing than I think the other graphs in the report. So
Very
it sounds
possibly.
like something you would like to see.
Yeah,
but
I would, but if they're available, then I can do that as a one-on-one or whatever, and get that info at some point. Not that I want to ask for it every time, but once in a while you see something on it, you wonder what that was.
And you can, when you have a bigger spectrogram than one you have there, you actually can see the blade pass, and you can see the pure tone show up and just in time. Very informative.
So Appendix H is the turbine operational data. In previous reports, we just had a header page that said Appendix, I think it used to be Appendix E, but Appendix H, and this is the turbine operational data, and that's it, and it was blank. And because it's provided in electronic format, because it's quite extensive. And so what we've tried to do here is say it's available, and so that people don't think it's missing when they're flipping through the report, that indicating that it is in electronic format, and someone can request it if they'd like it. So that's what that text there is for.
It kind of goes back to the request on the CD being attached type of thing.
So the CD has been provided to the board, and I reviewed one of them. I don't know if it's the last one or the one before. I think there was a single file, and it was a PDF.
Mhm.
And
PDF
is not very interactive. So
It needs to be an Excel file.
I believe we've had requests for an Excel file before. and
Yeah.
provided it.
I've requested Excel
Was it?
before.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've provided Excel to the department before. We can work on that. Yeah.
And in addition to an interactive format, I believe the only information that I had was, what did I have? I think there was wind speed and turbine output. And I think you've added to that wind direction. So that would be a helpful piece of information. If it's possible to somehow highlight NRO mode has been triggered due to either wind direction or time of day, that would be useful. Or if there are other reasons why turbine output may be other than naturally operating, such as an ISO curtailment, or GMP needs to work on a certain turbine or turbines, or for whatever reason, if there's some external force impacting the turbine output. I think that would be helpful for someone analyzing the data, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think the NRO mode is possible. I will have to defer to GMP on their SCADA system for the other factors.
How is an NRO implemented?
It's automatic, it's basically programmed into the control system.
What's it physically do?
Pitches the blades. So Vestas has their sound level table, and then they've got the same sound level table through like 6, 7, 8 different NRO modes.
Okay, and the, it's, I just find that ridge-mounted turbines are very hard to follow an NRO because the wind speeds vary so much in the rotation of the blades. It isn't like, the only time the turbine can really optimize the blade is in the 3 o'clock or the 9 o'clock position. Other than that, the wind speeds at that elevation, they differ from the bottom of the rotation versus the top. So NRO becomes less effective in that condition. Whereas if you're out in the plains, where you have almost laminar winds, then it's very effective.
So that's all the appendices that we have. That's the whole report. I'm happy to take other questions. I do want to express that I appreciate the opportunity to make these changes. I appreciate the feedback that went into making these changes to start, and the additional feedback now. So I hope you found it somewhat helpful with the additions, but I think we're looking to make them better as well.
I have one question, and this is just sort of now thinking back. Is there any place in the report that it discusses the percentage of time during the monitoring period when the turbines were operating at maximum power output?
Not in percentage format. It's in the operational data.
It's in the data, but is there any place that just calls it out that, 5% of the monitoring time that was at maximum power output? I think that would be helpful, even graphed somehow, to show during what you do, 2 weeks of monitoring, sometimes 4 weeks, what percentage of that time you are gathering data at maximum power output. I seem to recall that may be part of the protocol or the CPG or something, that part of the...
Max sound power, megawatts, I assume. It's because we currently do have the graph that shows power output, but the max sound power happens that it could be different than max megawatt power. It's the only thing.
Well, I know you've presented the information in some context, but I'm wondering about, over the monitoring period, how much of it is maximizing, and I think I'm talking about power output, not sound power output. In other words, how much of the monitoring time is everything on full bore?
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. I mean, we can provide, it's going to be very, very, you're talking 64.5 megawatts,
Yeah.
full plant output.
Right. And if
Which is
that
different than
doesn't,
max sound
if
power.
that doesn't occur at all, I think that should be in the report. Whatever amount of time that it's in there,
Yep.
and when, I think should be in the report.
Yep, that's very easy.
Careful.
That one is actually...
That's years of experience talking.
I had another question. The board issued an order on January 27th of this year responding to a complaint by the Nelsons about NRO reporting. And that order, at the very end, required GMP to include in future sound monitoring reports a narrative description of when NRO was triggered. So I may have missed it, but I wasn't sure that I saw that in this proposal.
The narrative description of when it was triggered and the effect that it had on project operation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think what the board had in mind was something along the lines of, NRO mode was obviously triggered in accordance with the nighttime schedule. We know that, but at any other times it was triggered, and it basically what the impact was on operations is just something that would give people a decent idea of how often it was going on and generally what its impact was.
probably, I think, similar to the annual report we filed. It's gonna be just in the quarterly. Right, we filed right? Filed a.
Yeah, we did get an annual report pretty recently. February 12th.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else from anybody? No? Okay, that's 4:25. I do want to convey the board's thanks to everybody for coming today. There were a lot of, I think, constructive suggestions and ideas, and I also want to thank everybody for being cordial and polite, because I know that this has been a bit of an issue for folks, so I really appreciate everybody's efforts today. Thanks. We're adjourned.
Could I just kind of talk about follow-up for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to have to interrupt.
I'm not gonna follow. We have a report due on May 2nd. It is going to be very difficult, I'd say impossible for us to address all of these by then. So we were thinking of proposing that we postpone the report by a few weeks to be able to address all of these, rather than having a report that addresses some and then follow up with the rest of it in the report for the spring 2-week period. But wanted to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, it's not something that I could authorize you to do,
Okay.
because, the protocol calls for it to be filed within a certain amount of time. But especially if people here think that that would be a good thing to get as many of these suggestions as possible worked out and into the next report, I guess what I would suggest is you just file a quick proposal with the board to do that. I would, just based on my experience, I would include in that proposal that there would be an initial summary of the findings filed on the original deadline date, with the full new report format filed, a few weeks later. And then folks, obviously, if you don't like that idea, you can file in opposition. If you like the idea, you can file in support, and the board would make a decision as quickly as possible.
Well, rather than wait until then, what do folks think about that idea?
I think it's a good idea, actually.
I think we'd like to start seeing the new report format, and may have further comments at that point.
Okay.
But I think,
Okay.
sounds acceptable.
And then, as I indicated before, we will also, as soon as we can get to it, provide an analysis of this issue of the adequacy of method 3.
Yes, I appreciate that. Anything else? Okay, thanks again. We're adjourned.
Adjourned once, adjourned twice.
I want to introduce